Cenk Uyghur's with us, host of the Young Turks and now formerly of MSNBC. Cenk, I've been watching all the coverage. You're talking to a lot of different people. I'm hearing a similar story, which is good, because that's the first step in making me think that it's true. But I can't help but feel like there has to be a little bit more to it. And my theory is, and you tell me, is that you were told before a couple times about this Washington's not too happy with you thing. Am I right?
Well, to be fair, I was told once in that big speech, right? And then there's this, as Glenn Greenwald has written about it, this pervasive feeling in the air of like, ooh, take it easy, be careful, you sure you want to say that? So those two things in combination.
So we talked a little bit about this in June of 2010 when we were at the same conference in D.C. And we said, you know, we get emails from people saying, hey, you guys are being critical of Obama. And I asked you, do you ever change what you say because of that? And you basically said no. And you said, if he does something that's not progressive or not liberal, I'm going to call him out on it. And that's great when you're on the Young Turks or on the David Pakman Show. But wasn't there some inevitability here in terms of MSNBC is GE? And not to say that there's anything bad about that, but it is a big corporation that in many ways is tied in to the political parties the same way News Corporation is. So is inevitability a word that was at play here?
You know, to me, when I went in, it wasn't necessarily inevitable because you see such great, strong, independent hosts like Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. But as we saw, apparently, in my case, that's how it turned out. And look, it's an interesting paradigm, right? It's not just binary, 0 or 1, black or white. It depends on where your status is. If you've been there like Rachel for many years and you're #1 in the ratings on MSNBC overall, and you've been that way for a long, long time, you've accrued more power, and you can exert that power by saying, hey, you don't mess with my programming, which Rachel does, which is great. On the other hand, if you're a guy that that's new, that doesn't have a full-time hosting gig yet, well, there the corporation can exert a lot more influence on you. And if you're in then you got to make a decision. I had to make a decision. It seemed to me that they wanted me to play ball. And as I told you before I went in, I had no intention of, kowtowing to Washington or the establishment or the Obama administration. If that's what they wanted me to do, then I wouldn't want to do the show. I'm not an actor. I'm an actual person with opinions, and that's why I do this. If I can't say my real opinions, no money is worth that.
So you indicated you turned down about twice the money for a reduced role. And couldn't the argument be made, even if you couldn't say whatever you wanted in that role, by just being on MSNBC, maybe you could direct more people to the Young Turks, and then there you can say whatever you want, and maybe overall you're still reaching more people. Could that argument be made?
Absolutely could be made, and I thought about that over and over again. And there were other great points to be made for staying at MSNBC. You know, I think I did a really good job of bringing other progressives onto the station. I'm not sure they ever had Baratunde Thurston on before. He's one of the founders of Jack and Jill Politics. He's editor of Onion magazine. I'm not positive whether he'd ever been on, but I had him on a couple times because I think he's awesome. And, you know, you just go down a list of a number of progressives I brought on MSNBC, and I felt great about that, and I felt like we could do that on the weekends too. So there were a lot of factors at play there, and I thought about that long and hard. But in the end, the deciding factor was, look, I've got this story that I know it happened to me. There's no question about it. And if I don't tell that to the Young Turks audience, what am I doing? You know, I had promised going in there to the audience, who I think got me the job in the first place, that I was going to tell it like it is. And if I bury that story, I just didn't feel comfortable.
Was MSNBC offended that you left? I mean, are you on good terms?
I would be surprised if I was on good terms. I have not spoken to them.
Well, I mean, certainly after the various rants, but at the point at which you left, was the impression that you were just both saying, we're not going to move forward? I mean, certainly now I can understand why they would be upset, but at that point anyway.
Well, when they offered me the, what people are calling the reduced role, weekends, contributor, et cetera, we were on fine terms, and to me, it's not personal at all. And in fact, they told the New York Times that I was very well liked in the building. And it's true. I don't mean it from their perspective. I mean it from my perspective, too. I liked a lot of people in the building, almost all of them. And I liked the hosts. I was on great terms with them, the producers I was on great terms with, et cetera, and management as well. We never had that kind of like personal conflict. To me, the story is more important, though. My ultimate bond and my ultimate contract is with my audience, and I've got to tell them that story. And I can understand if other people at MSNBC get mad about that, and who knows, maybe they don't believe me, given that their interests, et cetera, et cetera. But I really believe that. So I thought the story I had to tell the audience was more important.
In terms of just being the same corporate media structure that we're all too familiar with, even though they're putting out a very different product, are News Corporation and General Electric essentially the same?
No, I wouldn't say that. And by the way, remember Comcast now has a controlling interest in NBC.
Right.
No, look, I think Fox News is an entirely different animal. I'll give you a very good example of that. There have been emails from their vice presidents of news, whether it was Bill Salmon or John Moody, that are now public, where they literally direct their news anchors to say certain things on the air. For example, after the Democrats won in 2006 elections, they told their anchors to pretend that the Iraqi insurgents were celebrating, right? Democratic victories. It's absurd. It's unbelievable, right? They even tell them what words to use. So they say, don't call it healthcare reform, call it Obamacare. And their anchors listen to that. Martha McCallum reported the Iraqi insurgent thing, even though it didn't exist at all, just like her bosses told her to. And Bret Baier calls it Obamacare and has used the language suggested by the people in their news management, right?
Sure.
So I think Fox News is complete and utter propaganda. I don't think MSNBC is that way. I think that they respond to some pressure in some cases, right? And I think a lot of the cable news and a lot of the media responds to that pressure. And I don't think they're alone in that. I think CNN does as well. But this was a case where it was just a little bit more obvious in my situation.
My real concern is this, which is that while you were on the 6 p.m. slot talking to other progressive media people, it was great to say, hey, listen, it can happen, right? Cenk started on the Young Turks. He's the 6 p.m. guy now on MSNBC. He's out there. He's saying what he wants, so on and so forth. He's a real progressive voice. Well, it lasted a few months, but now it looks like actually maybe there isn't a place for a real progressive voice in the mainstream media. So the question is, to get a real progressive voice reaching that many people, is it just going to have to happen someplace outside of cable TV?
Well, I would say a couple of things to that. First of all, we just flat out don't need cable TV. Young Turks is at 500 million views. It's not bad. We did it without television at all, right? We're over 1 million views a day now. A couple of days ago, we were at 1.6 million views a day. So cable TV is not necessary. It's not the old world. It's the new world where we can get our message out in a way that they cannot control. Having said that, look, Keith Olbermann is on cable television at this point, and he's perfectly independent because Current's an independent station. And even going beyond that, look, people like Rachel and Dylan Ranigan have done a great job of exercising their independence within that structure. Now, they got there in different ways. Dylan was on CNBC forever and had built up that credibility. Rachel Maddow was so brilliant, internally at MSNBC, getting to the position that she's in, that she could have that independent voice. So there's so many different ways to get that message out. Obviously, I think the corporate media and overall corporations have a vested interest in making sure that we don't get that progressive point of view out, but too bad for them because we're coming.
Cenk Uygur, host of the Young Turks, really putting your money where your mouth is, or really actually telling them to keep the money out of your mouth and walking away from it altogether. So congratulations, and we'll talk soon and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, talk to you soon.